Hey, so I'm Nathan, just doing one of the podcasts with Subscribed. And today we are meeting with Rolly, and we're hoping to learn more about him and the problem that his product solves. So, Rolly, I was hoping you could just start by telling us a little bit about yourself and your background.
Sure, Nathan. Thanks for having me, by the way. So I'm a pure engineering background. I've been doing this since I was quite young. Did the usual kind of relatively traditional path into this world via computer science. Then I kind of took a left turn and then immediately out of uni started doing startups. This is my ninth startup, actually. Yeah. And it's been all over the place. And I think that's what appealed to me at the time. Like I worked in cybersecurity. I've done most recently machine vision, actually. I've
Mhm.
done streaming video. I've done automation all over the board. So yeah,
Nice.
it's been all over the place.
Cool. And what motivated you to become a SaaS founder? I mean, you've started so many now. It's like, what was that initial motivation of like, I want to just build this, and do it myself
Yeah, it hasn't
after I
changed actually. Like, because I've only been a founder of two of them, but even then, the
Mhm.
motivation was always the same. And interestingly enough, I think there's a lot of overlap between people who join startups and people who found startups, which is you want to make a larger impact than you maybe can one on one. And being a founder gives you that, right? Like a lot of environments, a lot of orgs, especially larger orgs, you feel very constrained by what you're allowed to do, how much you're allowed to touch, how the impact you can have. If you're in engineering, whether you're allowed to talk to customers. So a lot of stuff like that, where if you just want a bit more, founding your own thing gives you this.
Ability.
Absolutely. My co-founder Mandy also says I've probably just marinated in startup juice too long, and I don't know any other way now. I think there's a little
Yeah.
truth in that as well. But yeah, for me, it's the impact.
So I've actually only worked in the biggest I've worked in at Series A. So I've just always been in startups, and I don't know if I know how to function outside of that environment anymore. Like I'm genuinely not sure because it's such like a get things done environment, and it's just very different from larger ones.
Would you say you're also more of a early stage startup person? Because that's the other thing I've noticed. You have early stage startup people, mid stage, and late stage, and they don't. Like for example, I'm early to mid, and I kind of want to do something new.
Yeah. I think for me, it's at least that there's a direction and we
Mm.
kind of know the direction and there's some validation is where I'm like comfortable and feel good at joining. It's just a little bit hard during like as a product manager to be in that early stage iteration phase. And I don't know if you really even need a product manager at that stage. It's really just like really trying to understand even what your product is and then having someone come in to help enhance it. So just the direction, it's always been less anxiety for me.
Makes
Yeah,
sense.
and so I was just kind of wondering, like, so what does your product actually do, and what problem are you trying to solve with it?
Mm. Well, Perceivable combines AI and human coaching to help users be better communicators and kind of learn about your personal communication style and its own strengths and weaknesses.
Mhm.
We've kind of been talking about ourselves as we're your personal trainer for communication.
Oh,
We
cool.
kind of track your work persona by observing your online meetings. So we can give you then very tailored insights. So, me, for example, I'm trying very hard not to speak too fast. One of the things I do very poorly.
Mhm.
And that's something I like to have a bit of a reminder on, speak a bit slower, be a bit more measured. So it's knowing what your strengths and weaknesses are is a really clean and simple way to kind of improve your communication. And AI is good at that because it's got those tight feedback loops. The
Uh-huh.
other side of it is sometimes you just need a bit more of a sit down and talk with a human being, a bit kind of like, here's the longer path, here's what you can do that's a bit deeper. Humans are good at that. So our
Mhm.
view is you need both. So that's what Perceivable is trying to provide, basically.
That's really cool. I've been struggling with communication and trying to make my communication style maybe adapt to a no longer startup environment. So
Oh, yeah.
a lot less aggressive, a lot less like direct, and it's a really hard thing to learn and keep track
Yeah.
of and actually like check. So that's pretty cool. I think I'll have to try it out and like actually could actually really help with something that I was trying to figure out. And who's kind of your like ideal user? Like where do you really fit that this is perfect for? Or you've kind of found like an ideal target?
Well, we kind of have two right now. Um,
Mhm.
they're a little broad. One is anyone who's employed who works in a role where there's a lot of communication. I
Yeah.
come from an engineering background. I'm used to growing engineering teams. So I got my interest in this and how I got into this was spending many years scaling engineering teams and then finding out that it's never tech that's hard to scale, at least
Mhm.
in terms of getting the team functional. It's always communication. Communication is
Yeah.
always the issue. And people always try and solve it with another piece of tech. But
Yeah.
no, for us, it's education is the more of the issue. So for me, honestly, almost everyone in most of the engineering orgs needed this because I find most people in most areas of business are, you're taught that the thing that you're doing, like for example, if you're an engineer, you're told engineering skills are what matter.
Yeah.
Um, you never really explained in a real way. You never really taught, you never really tutored in, for example, that it doesn't matter how good your idea is if you can't communicate it to another part of the business because you can't speak to their needs. For example, if you're trying to sell an idea or a direction, but you've got to sell to a sales and marketing team, but you just can't speak to what's important to them and what's bothering them.
Mhm.
It won't
Right.
matter how good an idea it is. It won't matter how perfect it is. It won't even matter how good or how well it will work if they can't understand why they should care. And that's a pure communication problem. So anyone who's trying to get stuff done, and especially cross-cutting things, we have to speak to people who come from a different almost worldview or business viewpoint. This is a skill that they need, and it's something that we all struggle with. The other side, hiring is hard, especially right
Yeah.
now, and internal training is hard. Getting the right people into the right roles is hard. This is something I've had to spend a lot of time in, and something you always gamble on in the beginning is kind of, was this person going to be a good personality fit? I might be really solid on their skills, but I'm like, are they going to gel though? What's really useful is being able to go look at their personality and kind of go, oh, they're this style of communicator. They are kind of a bit relaxed and they're a bit this, and they're very inquisitive. They ask a lot of questions. That would fit really well with my team. So it's another dimension you can use when you're kind of going, is this person a good fit? In terms of internal training, similarly, I can't be in a meeting for all of my team. But if I get feedback that says, hey, one thing we've noticed is they never contribute. They seem to be very
Yeah.
engaged, but they don't contribute. You can go to them and say, hey, is this a problem for you? Are you doing this because you don't have anything to contribute? You just want to sit back and soak it up a little bit? Or is this something you want to work on? If so, let's put together a plan for you. We'll work through this together so you can be better at this. You can be more engaged and more involved. So
Mm.
from both point of views, it's the information I always wanted to be able to do my job as a head of engineering better and get the right people
That's cool.
promoted. So for both point of views, I've had both pain points
Yeah.
myself. So I'm trying to
Yeah.
kind of cover both sides.
So, kind of just looking back on your experiences, like trying to scale these teams, having this rolled out for your entire team, like, can you like how much impact do you think it would have on your time or on actually improving kind of communication across? What would you say that is?
Oh, significant actually. Like when I've been in the role of like a head of engineering, especially when you're early to mid stage, where like I'm usually scaling from 2 engineers up to 40 is my role. I'm
Mhm.
the guy that comes along and sets all that up and makes sure it scales to a certain size. And I'm like, great, put it in a safe pair of hands. That's my job done because that's my skill set. I'm good at that phase.
Yeah.
During that phase, there's a combination of technical scaling, which is almost always process technical. Like in other words, does your process scale with more hands without becoming messy? Does it become useful with more hands? And the other side of that is the communication. If if your process and your communication was only effective because there was only two of you and you could sit across from each other, that
Yeah.
will not scale. So it becomes, what do you throw away and what do you keep as you add another 5 people, then 10, then 20? What changes
Mhm.
at each level? And the one thing that doesn't change at each level is this basic processes. And some of them are really obvious, but people still don't do them. Like if you're going to have
Mhm.
a meeting, set an agenda, make it clear what the agenda
Right.
is, distribute it early, ask for feedback on the agenda, ask if anyone's got any questions. Like during the process, take
Right.
notes, distribute those notes, make sure there's action items. What's the point of a meeting if it has no action? It had no
Mhm.
impact. These are all really simple mechanical things, but people don't even do that frequently. So a lot of it is teaching these things. You
Yeah.
can imagine when you're kind of trying to scale this team, you're so time poor, and
Mhm.
this process is so time consuming. It's usually one-on-one. You're usually literally sitting with a person and trying to explain to them why their behavior is not getting the result they want, and then working through scenarios, and then going, let's circle back in a week once you practice this a bit. It's very time consuming. It's very
Yeah.
rewarding, but it doesn't scale. And if you're
Yeah.
also trying to do other things for the business, you just have no more time, basically. Your job becomes fixed communication.
Yeah.
So even being able to free up half of my week as like a tech lead or a head of engineering would be just such a gift, basically, for
Yeah.
someone like me in that role.
Well, I mean, I think it makes sense because you've had that background and experience. How did you, from that kind of understanding it's a pain point that bothers you, how did you go from that to validating that there was a market for it or that it's worth kind of building out? What was your process to get to that point?
It actually helps that I think this is actually one of the reasons why people say, you want the problem you solve to be your problem. It makes it a lot easier, right? I already
Right.
had a sample size of one. That's obviously too small, but then I can immediately go to a lot of companies I've worked with, teams I've worked with, people I've trained, people, my peers as well, and kind of go, hey, so this is the problem, right? Is this your problem too? And everyone kind of went, yeah, that's really annoying and time consuming. Cool. Are you using anything to solve that? Because I've been looking and I haven't found anything that I'm happy with. And some people are like, well, we use this, but it doesn't do this bit. We use this, but it's kind of just adds layers and it's not, we want something that gets out of the way, basically.
Yeah.
And then I kind of went, well, if this thing that I'm about to describe existed, would that help? And then some people were like, oh, yeah, of course. And the more useful people were kind of more like, yes, but
Yeah.
it has to do this. It has to stay out of the way. It has to integrate with some critical thing. It has to work. I'm 100% remote. My whole team's remote. It has to work with that. So I suddenly got a list of kind of like, if I want to narrow it down, here's things I should focus on. So I was very lucky in that sense that it's not even just engineering, but I happen to know a lot of people that are very passionate about this problem, including PMs. I've got a bunch of PMs where at various jobs where we used to sit around and go, how do we solve the communication problem? People are wasting time, too many meetings, not productive meetings. Okay, what do we do? We literally brainstorm how to improve it. Because as you imagine, from your own perspective, like the inability to deliver because you're getting bogged down is a massive problem for product management. Like it's a huge problem. It's if you're trying to put together a roadmap and engineering can never get there because we're always like 6 months behind and then lagging. It's a problem.
Yeah. And, it was the amount of time I had to spend in meetings. It was really hard to go from PM meeting to context switching and then starting to do some other feature work and then switch back. And by the end of the day, just so making that communication easier and not having those items slip or just the energy capacity it takes makes a lot of sense.
Feature work is it's deep thinking time, right? That you need proper space to do it.
And I was just wondering, like, when you sort of started first building this and getting it out there and getting it to like your first set of customers, what were some challenges that you faced in the early parts of starting this?
Honestly, the simplest one is everyone's busy. If you're trying to solve a real problem, you almost guarantee that the people you're trying to solve it for are also really busy. And even if they like you and they want to do you a favor, they're like, I don't have the bandwidth to look at this for a week. And then when I do look at it, it needs to immediately make my life better. Otherwise, I don't have time to keep looking at it. And that's hard in the early stages, right? Because you don't have product market fit yet. It probably won't solve the whole problem yet. So finding people that have got the problem and really feeling it, but are also willing to donate more time to their own detriment, really. That is really critical in the early stages because you need that early feedback. Then ideally you get a bit better and you iterate, and then it's a bit nicer when you give it to someone and they're kind of like, okay, now I get this now. It is helping me, so I will keep using it. But you've got to get over that initial hurdle of it's not good enough yet. The idea is good. They're engaged, but it's clunky or it just gets in their way a little too much or it has superfluous features or whatever it is. So that's really difficult. And there's that first hurdle.
How did you get over that hurdle? What was your how were you able to do it?
I had a lot of favors I've done for people in the past, and I basically called them in. I said, all those times where I helped you out, that time I came and consulted for free because you're a bit of a bind, all those things I went like, so this is me asking for help now, formally asking for help. I've done this. I've done a super thing and done another startup. I'm committed to it now. I need some help and some feedback, and I'm a little because you're a little too close to it at that stage. You need someone
Yeah.
to tell you your baby's not as pretty as you think, basically, and
Yeah.
why. So there was a
That
lot
makes
of that. And honestly, I think I've had 3 conversations with 3 founders recently where we said the thing that has been most rewarding about the founder journey is how much other founders are willing to pitch in and help you, even though they're flat out themselves. Like my experience with founders in general is they're really willing to just kind of go, oh yeah, cool. I'll introduce you to this person. They'll help you. Or, hey, yeah,
yeah.
I'll show you your thing to 3 of my friends. Like people are really nice and willing to help you succeed. Even people like borderline competition, they're kind of like, look, we're kind of all in this together. It's really hard. So
Yeah.
it's kind of amazing how many people are just willing to really help you in that stage as well.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like on several times I've gotten more help from a stranger founder than
Yeah.
some of my actual long-term friends.
Yeah.
And it's kind of crazy that like I'll meet a stranger who's just a founder and I'll just be like, "Hey, I need this." And he's like, "All right, I'll help you out." We don't even know each other, but it's a simple, if I have someone that you can meet, it's no effort for me and he'll pay it back later. So I really
Yeah.
like that mentality too. It helps a
Me
lot.
too. I think the startup community and certainly the founder community really lives and breathes by paying it forward. Actually, it's really
Yeah.
nice. I think I really like that aspect of it.
And what was it like with your first actual paying customers? Like how did you get your first one and what was just that experience like for you kind of getting your first one or first few?
Uh, it was pure joy and relief more than anything else. Because I don't know about you, but I'm a firm believer that as cool as an idea is, you can have a brilliant idea at the wrong time, right? People can't get it,
Right.
and people might not get it because it's not ready yet. Nothing proves you're right like someone being willing to give you money for it. Everyone will say your idea is good. Not everyone will give you money for it. So for me, it's the
Yeah.
true validator, right? Um, and it takes a lot of the pressure off. It puts some on as well because you're like, right now I've got to do better. I've got to get more. But for me, it was the biggest validator, more than like advisors telling us yes, more than VCs telling us yes, more than friends or family. That was the thing that was like, right, we got it right now. This is good.
Yeah.
Like, we can still
Nice.
improve it, but it's good enough for someone to put money on it, not and their time on it now. This is where we need it to be. So for me, it's the biggest go-to-market validator you can get. Like even one person paying is a huge milestone. Unless it's
Yeah.
your mum, that doesn't count. But everyone else counts.
Yeah. That just sounds very like true. It makes a lot of sense. It's just that once you get that first check, you've kind of validated everything and just that relief of you haven't built something useful that
Yeah.
solved the problem.
I mean,
And
go-to-market's the hardest, right?
yeah. So I was just wondering, like, how did you come up with your pricing strategy, and what was kind of your process in figuring out the appropriate price for your product?
We got some really good advice, actually. We have an advisor, which has been really helpful. He's even more of a startup veteran than me. It happens to also be from the AI ML space, which we're kind of aligned with. So we got good advice. But the advice we got on pricing was, you're going to be wrong.
Yeah.
People stress about it. Your pricing is going to be wrong for a while. You're going to guess it's going to be wrong. You're going to change it. You're going to guess it's going to be wrong. You're going to change it. The more important thing is, people fixate on the exact numbers. The more important thing is how you're paying. Like, for example, subscription based or not. Is it metered? Is it not? Like, is it based on using a certain number or like a usage plan? What is it based on? Like, how does it scale? Those are more interesting questions, and those are what VCs will ask as well. They're not going to care that your plan is $10, $20, $30 initially. It will
Yeah.
change a spreadsheet somewhere, and it will matter at some point, but it's going to be wrong. That number, whatever the number is, it's wrong. The more important thing is, as you say, are you a SaaS? Is it subscription based? Is it something else? Is it a one-off payment? Those will matter, and those you
Mhm.
need to get right a lot sooner. And they're harder to change as well. Like once you've kind of put it in, it's a lot harder to change from, say, a subscription based, which is based on a flat number, to a usage billing plan. That's harder.
Yeah.
So I don't know if this is sorry. I don't know if this is helpful because I struggle with
No, it
pricing
is.
as a problem.
Yeah.
But for me, the biggest thing we spend the most time on is not so much the exact numbers, but absolutely the model overall. Like what model are we going for? Like
Yeah.
basically, like ours is, for example, we have a free tier,
Mhm.
because we want to get people in there and we want to get the feedback. It's a bit limited. There's a number of hours you get with it. So then after that, it becomes you get this many hours in your plan, and but you can pay for extra usage on top. So ours is a blended combination of, at each level you get this, but then you can pay
Mhm.
for kind of overages if you want. And that allows people to be like, we want to be in the free plan, but we're going to have a busy month, so we want to play for an extra couple of hours. We want to
That's
make it
cool.
easy
Yeah.
for people to move up and down, but we don't want to
Mhm.
feel we want to encourage people to move up, but we want them to do that because they're getting real value. We don't want to be like, oh, you have to pay more because you went over 1 month.
Yeah.
Um, so we want
That makes sense.
people to be very happy to go up, basically.
Yeah.
So for us, that was
That's
a
cool.
consideration.
That's very cool. That's an interesting. I don't know if I've heard that strategy before. Like, I'm trying to think if I can think of another product that's like doing that I regularly interact with, and I'm kind of drawing a blank on that at the
It's
moment.
it's
But
it's one consideration. Like I should mention freemium because people talk about it a lot. For us, we have a
yeah,
free tier.
um,
One consideration you have in terms of a pricing model is how did we make the free tier valuable enough but cheap enough that you don't go out of business? Because if
right,
you're always going to have more free users, right? For us,
yeah,
that was what we did. We had to limit it more because we're bootstrapped. Like we got here by
mhm,
ourselves as well.
yeah,
Um, so we had to make it efficient and cheap, but we had to make it useful. And the way we
mhm,
kind of gave it a bit more legs was, yeah, it's a bit limited, but it has enough hours you can get some real value out of it. You could
mhm,
actually use it that way every month. But when you go over, you can get more if you need it without having to bump up a whole price tier. But
yeah,
when we charge you for those extra minutes, we charge them at a higher rate. It's kind of like
that
going
makes
over
sense.
on your mobile plan. So
Yeah,
we do very well. Our margins on those extra minutes are fantastic. Our margins on the base plans aren't as good. And that's
yeah,
because we think that's fair. If you're going to go over a limit, we'll charge you a higher rate. But it's probably also not a common thing. If you go over all the time, we're going to be like, you probably just want to go up now. You're going over
yeah,
every month. It's going to be cheaper to go up a plan now,
right,
basically. So it gives us ability, it gives them ability to kind of experiment a little bit with what the usage, and it gives us the ability to actually increase our margins when people are using more than their plan justified. So we actually do quite well. We ideally would want everyone to go slightly over every month from our point
yeah.
of view.
That's really cool. That's a very interesting strategy, and I think it's cool that like you shared that and not. I haven't heard it used that way, but I like what you're trying to do with it, and I can see how that leads to actually more revenue and more fair for the customers and fewer people like leaving.
Yeah, the churn is the thing, right? We want to avoid the churn. We ideally we want everyone to upgrade from free, but we also want free to be valuable because it's
Yeah,
part of our go to market, right? Like it's part of how you get
right.
people in the system. You get the data. We attract businesses because there's people on the data's there and people are there. So
Mhm.
it's a whole ecosystem. And if we penalized, if we crippled the free tier too
Mhm.
much, if we were too cheap about it, that would cripple also the professional plan, which is our upgrade plan, and the organizational plan. All of them would be equally crippled because we weren't fair to the free tier. Like, I think this is
Yeah,
another thing that's hard about pricing. They are related. Like each tier or level, however you're organizing it, there's an interaction between them. People move back and forward. People will look at them. People will reason about them and go, "Am I getting a good deal?" Like,
mhm.
but unless you're hiding your pricing, which I'm firmly against, yeah,
Yeah,
you have to make it fair. You have to
mhm.
kind of like be upfront about like this is where we win, this is where you win. Ideally, we both win, but if you spend too much here, we're going to do better than you. Or but if you do
Yeah,
this, you'll do better than us, and that's fine. You can pick.
yeah.
But that's a difficult thing, and I don't think we've got it right now. But I think we've got the right model at least.
Yeah, I mean, I can imagine how much of a challenge it is, but it sounds like a really interesting model, and I'm curious to see how it turns out.
Me too.
Comparing those to the other one, those are like it's super interesting how that stuff works. So for your product now, how with all these Gen AI tools that are coming up and everything that I feel like a new one comes out like every day now, how are you ensuring that you stand out in like this crowded space and kind of like keep your product going?
Yeah. Well, there's a few things really. One of them is that exact problem I was talking about earlier, where the exact market most of us are aiming at are people that are so time poor that they need something that's low friction. And that was me as well.
Mhm.
A lot of the products around productivity I found require you to invest in spending a whole lot of time in the UI. You're really digging into it. You're going through all these graphs and tables constantly. I personally wouldn't have time for that. I have time to get some feedback and occasionally go into it to get a summary or get a like set a goal or a direction. I don't have
Yeah.
time to be sitting in it every day. So for us, the idea that you can pretty much just connect what you use, like if it's Meet or Teams or whatever, and then set some like effectively auto join settings, like join for all these type of meetings, but don't join for these ones because they're a bit privileged, or these are my one-on-ones with team members. I don't want you to join for those. Being able to control that, then just have it kind of sit back and I do my normal things. And at the end of it, the things like, oh, by the way, you're speaking a bit fast that time. Try to set this pace. Or you mumbled a lot. Speak a little clearer. Or the biggest
Yeah.
stuff, like it's kind of goes, you're a bit aggressive that time. If that's what you meant to do, totally cool. But just FYI, this you can kind of do those kind of things around the personality too. Like and it's kind of based on the type of meeting. So, for example, if I'm presenting,
Yeah.
like it doesn't matter that no one is talking back to me because I'm presenting. But if I was actually trying to have a conversation with my team and I dominated it, and 98% of the time it was me talking, that's actually a problem, and I want to know that.
Yeah.
Yeah. So for me, I need that feedback very briefly, and I can't go too far out of my way to get it, basically. So I think that's
Okay.
one of our big things. We're focused on being as close to zero friction as we can make it,
That
as
makes
close as we
sense.
can anyway.
Yeah. But I think it is, because I see a lot of these habit trackers and I've tried a few of them, and if it's just too much, it's not helpful and it's just overwhelming. And I'm just like, I just need quick, simple to kind of change a habit or make improvements. So I like that concept. I think that's
Yeah.
really makes a big difference.
I actually think
And
that, sorry.
oh, no, you can go ahead.
Yeah, I actually think that was one of the things that why we couldn't find something to do this, because if we'd found something, we just would have bought it or paid for it ourselves. We
Yeah.
wouldn't be building it, right?
Right.
There's too many tools that focus on being a tool, like being that tool. They don't focus on what we think the real problem is, which is training, education. This is an educational
Yeah.
problem. You don't want the tool to get in the way of your education, basically.
Yeah.
And most of them seem to do that. Most of them are like, look at all the stuff of you, and you're like, yeah, but I just needed to know that I needed to shut up a bit more and ask more questions. That's what I needed to know, and you could have just told me that.
Yeah. That makes sense. I do think that a lot of these other tools, you aren't getting to like that root problem, and it's very cool that you have a specific problem that you're really solving and built a solution for that. And it's a seems like a very clear, well thought out pain point that you're solving for it. So I was just wondering, like, looking back on sort of launching your product and getting to this point, were there any mistakes that you made that you wish you did differently that you can share, so like anyone else who's viewing this can learn from it?
Oh yeah, so many mistakes. Yeah. I thought this would come up, so I wrote down some answers for this one because I wanted to give
Cool.
useful stuff. So
Yeah.
one of the biggest things, and I think this is partly because my co-founder and I are both technical. Like
Mhm.
despite our experience, still we think first in terms of technical aspects and even in terms of features. You have to think in terms of your differentiators, though. You have to do that early and consistently, and
Yeah.
that's potentially, I mean, your background, you actually might find that a bit easier because that is more of the product manager's job to think in terms of differentiator. But if you're, for example, if you're used to scaling a product from an engineering perspective, you're thinking of a whole different set of problems most of the time.
Mhm.
And that's the difference, I think, than being like the first hire for engineering and being the founder. Is engineering is second. Your first job is, why would someone choose this over something else? Like
Yeah.
if there's 5 other things that solve the problem, and it kind of as to your question before, if there's 5 other things that solve the problem, why does yours do it better? And why would someone pick this? And you have to be always answering that question. And if the answer doesn't stack up, you need to change.
Yeah.
And I don't think that was as natural for us because we're technical as
Mhm.
it should have been, and we should have done it earlier. It took us a little while to get into that kind of almost product mindset, because at first you're like thinking of what you're building, and you
Yeah.
can't think like that. You have to think of what value you're delivering and who wins and why they care.
Mhm.
You have to think like that consistently. That was definitely something that took us a little while to get in that mindset, and I wish it
Yeah.
hadn't, because that was wasted time from my point of view.
That's a hard one because it's like it's a lot of work to really validate your idea and really spend that time to understand it and understand who's going to use it. And
Yeah,
I feel like sometimes it's like it happens to me where I just get so excited about the solution that I just
yeah,
want to build it, do it, and not
yeah,
do that whole process. And it's just you just get caught up in that excitement.
yeah. One of the things our advisor kept telling us was, what story are you telling? And I'll be honest, that it annoyed me at first, but eventually I got it. And that started to help, like being reminded that it's like, what story are you telling? Not just with the whole product, with every feature, with every conversation, right?
Yeah.
If you're talking to a VC, like just all of it, like what is the story? Like, why is it compelling? because it is more about storytelling than it is about his like the mechanics of certain features. It isn't about me explaining how every feature works. It's me explaining why this hurts and why you want us to help you. And that is more emotional and more empathetic than anything else. And so it has to be more from a story perspective. It's not a list of
Yeah.
ingredients, right? It is, in fact, a story. It's a narrative.
Yeah. And just being able to really communicate that and share that story is so important to actually getting someone on board and convincing them about your solution.
Yeah.
So it's
Yeah.
very cool. Yeah. And I kind of wanted to expand it a little bit out. What about in your career? Like anything of just throughout your history of startups that, you wish you would have done differently or could share that maybe someone else going down this path of founder and
This is going to sound a little self-serving. The reason I focus on the communication lessons is I know what I was like in my 20s.
yeah.
I was that same engineer who was very good at their job and didn't understand why the sales team didn't listen to him.
Yeah.
And it was because they had a set of problems and I wasn't listening to their problems. I thought I had a solution to the problem, and I sometimes probably did, but I couldn't explain why what I was talking about was the solution. I kept going into, we're going to build this, we're going to have this. And they're like, yeah, that's cool, but we can't get into this type of org, or we
Yeah.
can't get them to do this. I wasn't actually answering their questions. I wish I'd understood a bit earlier that whenever you're communicating or convincing or trying to sell, you always have to speak in the language of the person you're talking to, not yours.
Yeah.
And that's hard, I think, for any kind of more specialized field. Because you're kind of like, you framed everything right in your way. If you're an engineer, you spend a lot of time framing it in your head, like building this little edifice of how you see the problem. You have to throw that away. You have to go with how they see it and how they hear it and the words they use, even down to the language. I now collect language that other like domains use, so I can use it when I'm talking to them. Because you might have the same terminology, but it might be a different word. Using your word is not going to help you get across. It took me way too long to learn that as a young engineer. I wish it hadn't. And this is why I spend so much time training my engineers to not do that. Because for me, it was a big mistake. It really hurt me earlier in the career. Because it's about impact, right? Like if I can't talk to people outside of engineering, I can't have as big impact outside of engineering, which always limits what you can do.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I have to try it out because I know for me, my communication is a little bit too aggressive in the workplace, and I'm just used to working at a very fast pace and making kind of quick decisions because you have to and you have resources that I think something like this could really help. So I'm definitely going to try it out because it's really hard to get this advice and coaching.
It really is.
Yeah.
This is, in some ways, this is the advice I wish I'd been given. Like, I wish someone had sat with me early in my career and said, right, what you're doing isn't working. Try some of these things. Like, some of them won't work, but try them at least.
That's very cool. And I actually went to a communications coach, and it's just that it's so unaffordable for very long.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's really cool to see if there's something that could reduce that cost to make it possible. So I'm excited to try it out. I'm thinking, and hopefully it can like help out with some of my.
That would be amazing, honestly. But we'd love your feedback as well. So
yeah, that's awesome. And kind of my last question I have for you is just what are some of your favorite SaaS subscription tools that you're using now? Maybe like top 5 or something like that.
Oh yeah. A lot of mine will be more engineering focused because that's where we are. We're big users of obviously things like Stripe because I mean it's actually unusual to have such a big player do such a good job. I'm generally like I kind of use AWS a little bit. I'd rather not, but kind of have to. Like I don't think it's the best thing. But then Stripe they're just a really good player. We try to use other startups as much as possible. Obviously, you vet them carefully for stability and a lot of other things, but as much as possible, we try to use the smaller players over the larger incumbents. So we're using a subscription service called Clerk for authentication, who have been really good for us so far. Cool. We actually moved from Auth0 to them, so from a very large one to a smaller one because we'd had some problems with Auth0. Oh, my favorite actually, this one I also wrote down because I wanted to give them a bit of a shout out. Yeah. We use Hyperping for status monitoring, and they're fantastic. And I think it might even be a one-man band, but
cool.
I want to give you an idea of the experience I had. We had a problem early on. I did the little, the intercom thing in the corner. Immediately got an answer from who turned out to be the guy who runs the show. I think he's in the opposite time zone to us, but he replied in real time and helped us through the problem. Great experience. Would thoroughly recommend using them there. It's a great service, really good support. Yeah.
Cool. Yeah, it sounds really cool and kind of definitely more on the dev side, but we still have a lot of engineers that'll check it out and hopefully we'll get find that useful and like try and speed up some of their processes. Well, it was like super interesting having this conversation with you, and I just wanted to thank you for taking the time and out of your busy day to help us out and share some of your experience with everyone.
Oh, thank you. Like this stuff's fun to talk about anyway. It's like kind of like founder therapy, right?
Yeah, a bit of it too. It really does help to kind of share those experiences to just kind of like get, have other people that know what you're going through kind of watch it, at least empathize with it. But yeah, really had a good time with this, and thank you for taking the time.
Likewise. Thanks, Nathan.